The first time the words were spoken, they did not sound like a wish. They sounded like a fracture. In a sunlit boardroom overlooking a city that bowed to her wealth, the female billionaire felt something inside her finally admit the truth it had been hiding for years. She wanted a baby, not as a headline, not as a legacy move, but as a desperate answer to a silence that money had never been able to fill. And on the same bright morning, in a cramped rented apartment across town, a single father with tired eyes and a lunchbox in his hand was about to unknowingly step into her world and change everything. If you believe that kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections can rewrite even the most powerful destinies, then pause for a moment and show some love. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Touch, because stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. Aarohi had built an empire in daylight. Her name shone on glass towers, tech conferences, charity galas, and magazine covers that praised her as fearless and self-made. She woke up every morning with the sun, ran along the river when the city was still quiet, and spent her days making decisions that moved markets. From the outside, her life looked perfectly designed. Inside, it felt hollow. At 42, with achievements stacked higher than skyscrapers, she returned each afternoon to a penthouse that echoed with absence. The rooms were bright, modern and cold, reflecting sunlight but never warmth. She had everything except the one thing she could not buy. The realization did not arrive dramatically at first. It crept in during ordinary moments, watching a mother soothe a crying child at a cafe during a business lunch, seeing a school bus unload children outside her office window every afternoon, hearing laughter float up from the park below while she stayed late reviewing contracts. The desire settled into her chest like a weight. She wanted to nurture, to protect, to belong to someone in a way that went beyond titles and achievements. She wanted a baby, and admitting that truth shook her more than any financial risk ever had. Across the city, Samir Ilyas lived a very different daylight life. His mornings began before sunrise, but by the time the sun fully rose, he was already walking his 6-year-old son to school, holding a small hand that trusted him completely. Samir was 35, a widower whose world had collapsed 3 years earlier when illness took his wife away without warning. Since then, he had been father, mother, protector, and provider all at once. His days were long and practical: work at a logistics warehouse, hurried lunches, school pickups, homework, and quiet exhaustion by evening. Yet despite the struggle, there was warmth in his small apartment, sunlight spilling through thin curtains, and laughter that survived loss. Samir never thought of himself as extraordinary. He believed he was simply doing what needed to be done. But the strain showed in the lines on his face, the careful budgeting, the way he avoided mirrors some mornings. Daytime was when he felt the pressure most, when the world moved fast and expected him to keep up. Still, he showed up every day because a little boy named Zayan believed his father could handle anything. Their worlds collided through something deceptively simple. Aarohi had started a foundation initiative focused on ethical labor practices and family welfare, determined to invest not just in profit but in people. As part of a routine inspection, she visited several partner facilities, including the warehouse where Samir worked. The visit happened in full daylight, sunlight pouring through high windows, dust motes floating in the air. Aarohi walked through the aisles with her team, observing quietly, her sharp eyes taking in details others missed. She noticed Samir not because he stood out, but because of how he moved: calm, attentive, quietly efficient. When a co-worker struggled, he helped without being asked. When a supervisor grew impatient, Samir responded with respect instead of resentment. There was a steadiness to him that felt rare. Later, she learned about his life through a routine report, the single father status noted in a margin. Something about it stayed with her longer than it should have. In the weeks that followed, Aarohi found herself thinking about him during her sunlit runs and long afternoons in meetings. Not romantically, not yet, but curiously. She had spent years surrounded by ambition, ego, and calculation. Samir represented something else entirely: stability without arrogance, strength without performance, and most of all, a living example of the family life she yearned for but had never built. At the same time, Aarohi's longing grew heavier. Medical consultations happened quietly, all during bright clinical mornings that felt cruelly ironic. The verdict was clear and clinical. Time was not on her side. Options existed, but none were simple. The more she considered them, the more she realized that her fear was not of the process, but of doing it alone. She had wealth, but no partner she trusted, no emotional anchor. The idea of bringing a child into a life built on solitude terrified her. Samir, meanwhile, faced his own crossroads. The warehouse announced restructuring, and although his job was safe for now, advancement seemed unlikely. Rising costs pressed harder each month. During one particularly hot afternoon, sitting on a park bench watching Zion play under the open sky, Samir wondered how long he could keep balancing everything without something breaking. He did not want charity. He wanted opportunity, dignity, and a future that did not feel like survival mode forever. Fate nudged them again when Aarohi requested a small focus group with employees from different backgrounds to better understand their needs. Samir was selected almost by accident. The meeting took place in a bright conference room, sunlight reflecting off polished tables. Aarohi listened more than she spoke, absorbing stories of struggle, hope, and resilience. Samir spoke last, his words measured and honest, describing the challenges of single parenthood without bitterness, emphasizing the importance of stability and respect at work. Something shifted in Aarohi as she listened. This was not a man seeking sympathy. This was a man who had already built a family out of loss and love. For the first time in months, her desire for a child did not feel abstract. It felt possible, tangible, rooted in real humanity rather than clinical solutions. What followed was not sudden or dramatic, but careful and complicated. Aarohi offered Samir a role in a new pilot program aimed at leadership development for employees with caregiving responsibilities. The opportunity came with better hours, increased pay, and growth. Samir hesitated at first, suspicious of generosity from someone so far removed from his world, but the offer was sincere, transparent, and respectful. He accepted, not knowing how deeply this decision would intertwine their lives. As weeks turned into months, their interactions grew frequent, always professional, always in daylight settings, but layered with mutual understanding. Aarohi observed how Samir balanced work calls with school schedules. Samir noticed how Aarohi stayed late to ensure policies were implemented fairly, not just announced. They spoke about responsibility, about loss, about the quiet fear of failing the people who depend on you. No dramatic confessions, just shared humanity. The unspoken truth eventually demanded space. Aarohi's longing could no longer be ignored, and Samir sensed the weight she carried. When she finally revealed her desire for a baby, it was not framed as a request or a proposition, but as a confession of vulnerability. She admitted her fear, her loneliness, and her admiration for the life Samir had built against all odds. Samir did not respond quickly. Daylight passed into evening and back into morning as he reflected. His life had been defined by responsibility, not impulse. He thought of Zion, of stability, of trust. He also thought of Aarohi, a woman who, despite her wealth, stood emotionally unarmored in front of him. What she wanted was not ownership or control, but connection. The decision that followed changed both their lives, not because it was perfect, but because it was grounded in honesty and care. They chose a path built on mutual respect, legal clarity, and emotional responsibility, ensuring that no child would ever feel like an experiment or a transaction. It was not a fairy tale, but something far more powerful. It was intentional love. Life transformed quietly after that. Aarohi's penthouse filled with warmth, toys catching sunlight where art once dominated. Samir's days grew less strained, his nights more hopeful.